morning. Please, Sudas Mitzvah, chelik of bringing Torah to the world. I found myself in this year in Sfira asked many questions that have to do with questions in Midos, interactions with people, and therefore I decided to dedicate the shir today to questions in Chosh and Mishpat. And I think that most of the subject matter which I'm going to be speaking about is probably counterintuitive. That means that you would have thought the Halacha was one way, but the Halacha is the other way, or at least you would understand that it's not so simple as one would think. I would like to preface these words with a part that I heard many years ago. And I think that this is an important lesson in our observance of Yiddishkeit. If I were to ask you a shaila and hilchas treifas, we found an animal that has a new kind of a disease, do you think it's kosher? So if you have any sense, you say, I have no idea, right? We don't know anything about the subject, so why should I offer an opinion about something that I know nothing about? I think that makes sense. I get questions all the time, and I'll just use this as an example. Someone comes over to me, their face is white. My tefillin dropped, and it got a bang on the corner. Is the ribua kosher? Now, I'm not posketing the shaila right now, but the halacha is if it looks square, it's square. Okay? But nobody's willing to take the plunge and say it's square and that's it. That we're going to ask the rabbi. When I have a question, whether I'm allowed to charge or whether I'm allowed to chisel here or there, everybody has an opinion. It's an interesting thing. And the Gemara says, I mentioned this, person wants to become a Talmid Chacham, he should be involved in the Zakim. The reason why, I think, is as follows. The sefer called Shimusha Shel Torah, written about Rav Shach. And there Rav Shach says something which is unbelievable. I believe it's worthwhile to come here today just to hear this vart from Rav Shach. Rav Shach said that a person who goes to a shir, and after the shir, he evaluates what his Rabbi said, this part was good, this part was no good, etc. That person will never grow to become a bigger Talmid Chacham. He will just have his own seichel, and it may be a little bit more honed and sharpened. The person who he subjugates his seichel to the seichel of his Rabbi, he throws out the old and takes in the new, that which his Rabbi teaches him, can become a greater Talmid Chacham. I remember when I told this idea once to my son, I gave him a mashal that I heard once. It says, whenever you pour from one thing to something else, the laws of physics demand that the thing that you're pouring from has to be higher than the thing that you're pouring into. Okay? Now, just to complicate matters, you could have all different kinds of things in the middle, a wire going up and down. But at the bottom line, if you want to be a makabel, you have to make yourself lower than the person that is giving off. If you think that you're higher, you're not going to get anything. And that's just a mushal on this idea. And Chosh and Mishpat, everybody thinks they know it. The reason why they think that they know it is because I thought about that already, and that's why I think, and if that's what I think, that's what's right. Okay? Now, we're all guilty of that. This is not speaking to an audience saying that I'm one way, you're the other way. We're all guilty of this. And the Chazon Ish writes about this in a fascinating piece where he sets forth a question, who's the Roidif and who's the Roitzeach? And then he brings one halacha in Shulchan Aruch, so makes Reuben the Roidif and Shimon the Roitzeach. Then brings another halacha in Shulchan Aruch, then it seems the other way around, that Shimon is the Roidif and Reuben is the Roitzeach. Then a third halacha, and he has your head spinning trying to figure out. So you have to know all the halachas to find out just who's the Roidif and who's the Roitzeach. It's a fascinating thing. Habola Horgo Yashkim Yargo. Somebody comes to steal in the middle of the night, so the halacha is the balabas is allowed to kill him. Why? Because the Gemara says he came on the skin of flashes. He came the horeg or the horeg to be killed or to kill somebody else. So the balabas is allowed to kill the man. So the man says, well, if that's the case, so I could also kill the balabas because he's going to kill me. I'm going to kill him. Is that true or not? And the halacha says not necessarily so. So here we have, you have to know the halacha in order to have an opinion. At least you have to know halacha. It's not enough to have an opinion. So I'd like to start with some questions which are fascinating. The following incident happens all the time. I'll start with a case that happened in my family. My father, Zachariash, had a pair of tefillin that were written by a sofer. It was very famous. His name was Davidovich, very famous sofer. And the bottom were made by a bottom macher called Shammai Sofer. And my father, Zachariash, wanted to repair them. They were already like 30 years old, and he gave them into somebody to repair them. And this is in the times in Eretz Yisrael where things, with no telephones, it was hard to get in touch with people. And it took about a year for him to get back in touch with the person who was supposed to fix the tefillin. And what was found out was in the interim, the man died, and nobody knows where the tefillin are. And this is before WhatsApp, okay? This is before the cell phone. This is before everybody in Eretz Yisrael had a telephone. We used to write letters on aerograms. I don't know if you people know what it is. You could check it up in the Smithsonian Institute and you'll find out what an aerogram is. Anyways, so I went to the family and I said, where's my tefillin? And we said, we don't know. This workshop was cleared out. What do we owe you? Do they owe anything? How do we attack such a question? So, just not to keep you on a cliff, when I conveyed this, what happened to my father said, as he would say many times, "Shine, amoichel." Yeah, that's what happened in that situation. What he's going to have these children pay for their father's thing. But what's the question? Where does it revolve around? Many times in this country, it's common. You give something in to somebody to fix it, and he says, I can't find it. It's common. I know of an incident, quite humorous. Person gave in something to the cleaners, and he came back to pick it up, and the guy in the cleaner said, we decided it wasn't worth cleaning, so we threw it out. Very nice. Anyways, you're saving you money because he decided for you what's important for you. Okay. Anyways, that's the world we live in. Welcome to Israel, right? So I guess we could think about celebrate today. Anyway, this is the society that we live in, and you have to know how to deal with these situations when they arise. The halacha is as follows. The halacha Siman Shin Vov in Choshen Mishpat tells us that when I give something to an uman, to a craftsman to fix, so he becomes a shomer socher on that. And he has certain level of responsibility to watch, to guard, to take care of that item. And if he does what he's supposed to do and something happens, he's potter. If he doesn't watch it as well as he's supposed to, then he would be chai. Now I'm just going to stop at a situation where there are certain things. Let's say a person goes to a carpenter on Rehov Beis Yisrael in Yerushalayim, and he asks him to shellac his cupboard. And the guy shellacks it, and what does he do with it? He puts it outside to dry. And you come back, and it's gone. Was he shomer kedech Hashem or not? How do we evaluate that? Okay, these are not like, fancy stories. These are things that happen, unfortunately, every day, right? Is that called, well, how do we decide what's Shem Kedech Hashem, what's called Ha'aynis, what's called Ha'aynis Gamor? We have to know how to attack that situation. Now, what's important, and this is a key factor, there are people who say things and they don't realize that what they're saying in my Sunday night shir, I mentioned this question. We all know that you go to the store and you buy exactly at what point? In my wagon, it became mine. When does it become yours? Now, none of us, when we went to the Makalas, had das mikoin. We weren't maf'il becoming a button, right? But obviously, it's implicit in the action. It's supposed to know in each situation what it is. The halacha is that he changes from being a shomer sachar to a shomer chinam. Why? Because he's finished with it. He's now a shomer chinam. There are situations where you can even lose that status, and he's patur altogether. So when a person says, I finished it, it depends on more particular things what his status is. That means that your status of the craftsman, when you leave something there, you left your car by the mechanic. He called you up and said the work is done. And he left it on the lot and it was stolen. What's the halacha? But these are, and there is an halacha difference. You know, we're closing now. We just finished. If you could get here in 5 minutes, and you're in right now in Tel Aviv. There's a difference whether you're in Ramat Beit Shemesh, whether you're in Tel Aviv. So a person who says something, whether you're the craftsman or whether you're the client, exactly what was said between you, and most of the time, this is why I'm pointing this out, most of the time we don't even know what we said because we're just having a conversation. We're not thinking with a legal head as to what's being done. And many times when I try to interview the people to get exactly what they said, they have no clue because they weren't paying attention themselves to what they were saying. And they don't know that there are key words which represent halachic changes. This is a very important concept for a person to be aware of. Well, we're going to discuss deposits in a minute, and we're going to discuss check the chuys also, and they have fascinating halachas to them. Again, counterintuitive that when you think. I'll just say right now, maybe we're going to skip this right now. Okay, I'm doing something, and I'm giving you check the chuys starting from, right now we're in the beginning of May, right? So I'll give you check the chuys starting from the 1st of June. When did you pay? So the halacha says that check is a pekadon until the 1st of June. And technically, it's not even called that you gave money, and there isn't even a mishapara to back out. Just give you an example. Okay? If the first check was already deposited, I'm giving you one now, and then the next one, the 1st of June, then there will be a whole different story. So I'm just using that as an example. You see, and these are things that happen every single day. And people are not aware that the smallest, minutest change makes a great difference in the halacha. Okay. I would like to share with you the following incident. And I will not say who the Rav was. It's a very distinguished, in my opinion, a world-famous Rav. And I think that he paskined wrong. And it was, in my opinion, I think it was over on a great avera to many people. I'm going to preface this with a story that happened with my father, Zachariash. A certain butcher shop wanted a hechsher on their store to say glatt kosher. And for whatever reason, which is not going to be divulged in this share, that just couldn't be. even though the meat was glatt kosher. The man only received glatt kosher meat, was 100% glatt kosher. And my father told the man, it's called Upgegas in the flesh. Upgegas in the flesh. Somewhere else. Halacha is meat has to be salted within the first 72 hours. If it's not salted within 72 hours, so then we assume the blood can't get out of it. There is a way to restart the clock by soaking the meat again, and then that softens it up, and then you can redo it again. I'm not getting involved in the technical aspects, and this evolved into something that you could even wash it down, and as long as you wash it down, many places can consider that that's okay. And this man's meat, though the meat was glatt, it was upgegas in the flesh, which means it was watered down. I don't mean watered down as in stealing in the weight, but it was washed down meat. And therefore, my father said that you cannot have a hechsher that it's fine. So the man walks away, accepting that which my father says. As soon as the man is out of my father's hearing, I say, what does one have to do with the other? So glatt is referring to a halacha with the lungs, that there are no lesions on the lungs. And the meat is 100% glatt. There's a different question. There's a question of a different b'diavad about whether you wash the meat or not. So my father looks at me, as he did many times, as I said, po ba'aretz, misken, or nebuch, and he said, did you ever hear of a glatt kosher dairy restaurant? What in the world is a glatt kosher dairy restaurant? So he got me, right? We all know what a glatt kosher dairy restaurant means. It means without any shilas. The word glatt kosher has a technical meaning, and it has a vernacular meaning, the way that people understand it. Glatt kosher has nothing to do with lesions on the lungs only. Glatt kosher is an atmosphere and a level of kashrus which people are looking to embrace or not embrace. That's what it means. So if I am going to sell this meat, tell people that this store is glatt kosher, I'm fooling the customer. I cannot let him sell it as glatt kosher because it's not. My question is, technically it is. The answer is, technically it is. But the way that it's defined means something totally different. And one has to be careful when somebody is doing something that he meets all the requirements. I think that this is a rather simple idea. I was standing together, and this I will say by name, because I think it's an important concept to know. I was standing together with Rabbi Reuben from Rehovot in his mishchata about 30 years ago. And the bodek of the animal came to him with a question, and he checks it out, and he says, put it in the kosher, don't put it in the glatt. And I said to him, can I see that? And I look at it, and I say, this is 100% glatt kosher. He says, it is 100% glatt kosher. So I said, so why did you say to put it into the kosher and not into the glatt? So he said, because Rabbi X says that it's not kosher. He's 100% wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Whatever he said, it's very strong in his words that he totally disagrees with that, Rob, on this particular issue. He said, but he's an opinion. Whether I disagree with him or not, doesn't make him not an opinion. I cannot sell it for glatt. Now this is questionable. Because when I am selling something as glatt under my hechsher, possibly that means, by my standard, what I call glatt. Doesn't necessarily mean globally. We'll leave that as an open question. But here you understand that the person who's giving the hechsher has to know what he's selling. What happened? I was in a matzah bakery and finished making matzahs, and there was a chabura of this very famous Rav afterwards, and some dough from a previous baking fell into the machinery. And I ran over to him and I told him, and he said to me, it's okay. And he cited to me the sources. And leave it. I was very annoyed. I didn't say anything. And I left it. Okay. Now I'm going to tell you what happened to me. And then we're going to discuss things that may happen to you. There was a bakery, there is a factory, what do we call it exactly, a place of business in Yerushalayim where they hand grind the wheat for matzah. And the people are paid there to, like in the old days, row the oars in a boat. So that actually they're spinning this wheel that grinds the wheat. And anybody who comes out of there looks like they're a Yom Kippur specialist. They come out white, totally white, full of flour. And to leave, before you leave, they have an air gun, a pressure air gun that you can wash it, blow yourself off, whatever you want to call it exactly. Clean yourself off from this white powder. For some reason, it was not muvusat exactly properly, and there was condensation inside of it, and when you press the button, a little bit of water came out. And some of the water came out and fell into a sack of flour. And they called me up and they said, Rabbi Zachariash, what's the halacha? So I said, in Or Chaim, or in Choshen Mishpat, or in common sense. I'm not sure. There are three different places that one can go to look to answer this particular question. The halacha in Or Chaim, as far as Chomet for Pesach is concerned, it's 100% mutter, and I'm not going to get exactly involved why. In Choshen Mishpat, my position is somebody who's paying to have this special kind of flour is not interested that they have to call Rabbi Zachariash and find out if it's okay or not. And that's called, it was sold under false pretense. So we have two total, mutter, aser, and then I would like to add the practical aspect. I said, take a look in the sack of flour and see if you see any balls of moisture. If you see no balls of moisture, or you took all the balls of moisture out, or you took off the top part, you don't have to worry about it. Why is that so? Because there's nothing to worry about. Now, let's say that's true. Okay? I'm just using, these are things that happen. But there's a guy do I have to worry about him or not? A question. A person this teken means put in, let's say, and the way it worked out in this building at 19 inches is a lot of, I can promise you there will be absolutely no difference whether you did 18 inches or 19 inches. Can I do that or not? Where do I have the right to deviate? Okay, these are real questions. How many screws? Oh, everything you put in screws, they put in 6 screws where you need 3. That's the way things are built. The other ones are just not necessary. Obviously, it's always better to have more, if you like schlepping things around, but whatever. But the question, what are you obligated to do? What are you not obligated to do? These are real questions. Now, I'd like to share with you some halachic information. The Chidah, in Sefer Chaim Shol, Chelik Aleph, Siman Ayin Dalet, discuss things which al pi halacha are not a mum. That's something, there's nothing wrong with the mekach. But people consider it one. And he says if people consider it something insufficient, then that's the halacha, it's insufficient. Even though, al pi halacha, it's okay. Because the laws of Choshen Mishpat are determined by the norms of society. This we're going to discuss this a little bit more in depth. So if people consider it like that, then that's called what's acceptable. The Prima Godim in Siman Kuf Sam Chazayin Sifkot and Chofei speaks about situation, and I'll just share this story with you. I had this story with a batim macher. I was in a batim macher shop, and I see a box of batim, and as you people know, I'm a very nosy fellow. I said, "What's those batim?" He said, "Those are subbet." I said, "What's wrong with them?" He says, "Nothing." So I say, "So what's wrong with them?" So he says they're inferior. So I said, "What's inferior about them?" So he puts them on the press and applies pressure. At a certain point of pressure, you see that the batim are caving in. I said, "What's inferior about that?" So he says, "I want my batim not to bend only a certain amount of atmospheres of pressure. And this has less than that atmosphere of pressure. And therefore it's substandard, therefore I won't sell it." So I said to him, I don't know if you know I'm Jewish, I'll buy them at a discount. There is absolutely nothing wrong with them. You invented a threshold and a standard which does not exist anywhere in Halacha. I said to him, with that strength that that bias has, those batim will last 80 years at least. I don't think anybody is buying tefillin to last more than 80 years. Maybe the ones you're talking about, you could sand them down 5 times and they last 150 years, but that's well above. You made a standard that you just thought of by yourself, and you call this substandard. I'll buy them, I'll make a gemach out of them, and we'll have Klal Yisrael benefit. And he looks at me, looks at the tefillin. I'm not selling them, and I'm not giving them. So I said to him, "What are you doing with them?" He says, "Nothing." What's going on? He's a craftsman. He's not willing to have something that's substandard leave his head. Anybody who's a craftsman understands, once you do that, you let those tefillin go, there's a hole in the dam. He will not do it. He will not throw them out because they're 100% good. He will not use them because they're 100% bad. And he's stuck. He's stuck. But there's no place for that, says the Prima Godim. If there's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, then the halacha is paskin that it's mutter. Even if there's a deya that's machmer, a person cannot tell his uman, the guy who's servicing him, it's not good enough for me, it's substandard. If there's a standard which makes it standard and you want to be machmer more than the standard, you do not have a place. That's not a taina. He can give it to you even though you were expecting better. It's a fascinating idea. Now I'd like to discuss the basic yesod in Hilchos Choshen Mishpat, which is unbelievably difficult. Hakol keminik hamadim. Any bocher who learned to yeshiva Ketana knows what those words mean. The older you get, the less you know what those words mean. And I'll just share with you an incident that happened. There was a certain question in this case Shchenim about a building that needed to have something fixed, and there were 2 knisot. And the halacha is that all the Shchenim have to pay for this nezek. And the question was, do we consider 2 knisot 2 buildings, 2 knisot 1 building? So someone asked me, I said, I have no idea. You have to ask a Choshen Mishpat expert. No, I know what the halacha is, but how do we execute this halacha? I don't know. And I asked 2 different dayanim from 2 different segments of Klal Yisrael, And one said to me, clearly the minig is like this. And the other one said the minig is like that. Okay, so I was right back to where I started. I have no idea. But there's an answer to the question is that there's a minig. And the minig is koveya. The minig is koveya. Ad hechlan dvar magim. A person has a worker illegally. Still, the givens of vacation, pitzuyim, are in place. It does not depend on whether you have the worker work for you legally or not legally. This is the accepted practice. And it doesn't have to be that you said it, because that's a given. If you said that you want to do it under a certain understanding, in Choshen Mishpat, you have a right to make up with the other side whatever you want, and Shulchan Aruch doesn't govern. But when there is no Shulchan Aruch, then the Minig HaMedina governs. And most of the time, the halacha is that the Minig HaMedina is in place in agreement. In other words, and I'm going to use this as an example. There is no such thing in halacha as a Ahavas. The closest thing that there is to Ahavas, as far as I know, is a Zaituvia here. What the halacha is that you have a neches, which is mishutaf. Any one of the shutfim can refuse to do something which was not what the shutfus was made up at. The prevailing minig in Eretz Yisrael is that Ahavas governs the neches mishutaf on normal things. When there's something which is not normal, it's out of the range of what's normally done, then we revert back to the halacha, and even one shutif can hold back. And I'll just use this as an example. This is very common in Yerushalayim. There's a thing called Tama 38, which means that they want to build out, the government gives money to expand the apartment building so there could be a mamad, and the kablan who accepts to do that, he gets 2 diras and everybody else gets a few extra rooms, and it's free money, like all Jews love, right? It's free money. Now, one guy says, I don't want to build out. He has the right.
Why is that minhag not minhag malchus?
We'll soon discuss. If we have time, we're going to get to Dina Machusa too. But Dina Machusa does I have about a half hour on that. I don't know how we're going to get to exactly. But that's not what was governed. That was not what was governed. They don't have a right to legislate in that area. We don't go by Roiv. It's not a democracy, because if you go by Roiv, so then all children will be able to vote their parents out, right? It doesn't go like that. Okay. The bottom line is that there is a infrastructure which is in place. Now, I like to. This nakuda of the minig incorporates many aspects of Beinon M'Chaveroi in when we hire workers, when we pay for them, etc. I would like to read a Chazanish in it's over here. It's over here someplace. There. Gedalia. Here. In this country, forget about halacha. The government doesn't have any issues with people settling disputes through other means. They're not looking for business. In fact, in many branches of litigation, there are people who have this as a hobby, retired judges or retired foremen in building, that there's like a guild and you can have a question and you can go to them to arbitrate, and the government is absolutely okay with it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with arbitrating. Whether you can go to Beis or not, that's a different question. But arbitrating, that's a different question. Has to be discussed at a different time, the legal aspect. But they're not against arbitration. And being they're not against arbitration, if there's a Beis Din, Dina de Machusa doesn't say listen to us and not to Shulchan Aruch. The question of Dina Machusa, in the classical sense, has to do with things that have to do with the Medina. I like to read a Chazanish, which is not the Chazanish, it's the Marik, it's the Shach, it's many poiskim. We get to this. B'chol zeh b'releka mini. Avol nika minik, hochacha minik. We go after the minik. Ubestama have a psika kaminik amadina. If nothing was made up, the understanding is that we're going to finig amadina. V'chein yesh dina machusa. If there's a dina machusa, yesh lema destama samka fi dina machusa. We made up like the dina machusa. No, it's not because dina machusa dina we have to listen to them. That's what goes on all the time. So then that's the accepted meaning, not because of the halacha of dina machusa, and there are very big nafkaminas to this, but that's the given understanding. Fine, okay. Our the dina machusa dina lo shayach b'Yisrael. B'Yisrael, when you have a Jew versus another Jew, when it doesn't offend the government itself. So dina machusa there's no dina machusa that have to go to court. Dina machusa is speaking about a very certain specific situations. I'm not going to get right involved in all of dina machusa, because I'll probably need a whole separate share unto itself. But the concept is that there are situations, and that's mentioned this many times. I'm going to use a situation which, again, all these things need shiurim to explain because people have preconceived notions. There are halachas in Hilchos Shchenim about what your shachet is allowed to do or not allowed to do. Now, let's say a person wants to build over here next door an 18-story building. So there are many people which may not like it because it's an eyesore. So there's certain places the law is you have to go around a certain radius of neighbors, and if they object, then you can't build. Do you have a right to object or not? Okay, this is something that happens all the time. So the law says that you're allowed to object. The law doesn't say that you're not allowed to look in the Torah and see if the Torah says you have a right to object or not. So if the Torah says that you're not allowed to object, Dina de Machusa that says you have a right to object doesn't clash with the Torah at all. So you have to ask a shaila before you object. Get to what do you mean? It's a very important concept because these two things are not related. They interact, but they're not related. And similarly, when we make a business deal under the given minig, and let's say the minig is the law, okay? Because that's the minig of the law. That's the simplest minig. We understand that that's the minig. And then the law changes. How does it affect our contract? We started our contract under certain terms. If we had a contract, a written contract, and the law said, you know what, I want to change the contract. You can't change a contract after it's signed. That's the end. What about if we said that we're doing it like the minig, and then the minig changes? Then the contract changes. Because it wasn't chiseled in stone as what was going on at that time, if the minig was to go after the law. Sometimes, and this is something which again, each situation has to be figured out on its own, the situation is that we're going to be koveya as what the law was at that time. So again, these are situations where a person has to know exactly what's going on at that time. Now, I got asked this question last week, and I get asked this question often in different venues, and it's very difficult for me to answer. Not because I don't know the answer, but because it's hard to say many things at one time. There's what's mutter, and then there's what the Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. Okay? For instance, a person who damages through grama. So the halacha is grama b'nezakin is pater. So somebody comes to me and says, I'm not getting involved in the situation, but I damaged this person with grama. What's the halacha? What am I supposed to say? So if I would be an erlachiyid, I would say you should pay. Now that's funny because I just said that the halacha is government zaken pater. I didn't fall asleep on myself yet. But the halacha is you're chayiv to pay b'dei shamayim. What does that to mean? Either you're chayiv or you're pater. So when I learned in yeshiva, Perek Hazov, my yeshiva should be well, he explained the following concept. The Gemara says sometimes, v'yesh loy tarumas alav. You're allowed to have, I want to translate that. You're allowed to have ill feelings or complaints, feel bad about, how do I translate it? Someone want to translate it? Okay, whatever it means. But you're allowed to have bad feelings towards a person. Someone should have said, what is this, a Mussar Sefer? The Mussar Seder? Here you're okay if you had bad feelings. And he explained as follows. There are sometimes financial obligations which are strong enough that you can actually collect. Sometimes there are financial obligations that are not strong enough that you can collect, but you're chayiv b'dei shamayim. Sometimes there are financial obligations that are enough that Beis Din can't force you to pay. You're not mechuyev b'dei shamayim, but you get a mishapara, you get a klala. And sometimes there are financial obligations that are enough that the person has a right to have kindness on you. That means that there is a financial injustice done that really should be straightened out. That's what it means. We're expressing the level of financial obligation in that situation. There are people who hire somebody, and what I had just recently, somebody hired somebody. I want you to take me a taxi from Yerushalayim. I forgot where it was, and they were moving. That's what they were moving from one place to another, and they was to come that night. And they made up more or less if they're going to do it. And then in the morning, the guy said, "You know, I don't need this guy altogether." And he wanted to know how much is he obligated in that interaction. So there are all kinds of halachas involved in this. It's in the Medrash and Chashmishpat discusses when is it that you get a mishapara, when is it that we say that something is binding. In America, there's an expression, it ain't over till it's over. Those who know what that means, it's good for you. And those who don't know what it means, it's even better for you. But at any rate, there are, in the world of business, if you didn't sign a dotted line, nothing happened. Nothing happened. It's all promises, it doesn't mean anything. So therefore, you're allowed to back out. How much is your word worth? And this is a question which is discussed in the place, and I'm going to share this with you. This is a very hurtful question. I own 25 diras, and I'm looking to do shiputzir on 25 diras. So I call in kabbanim, and I tell kabbanim I'm planning to do these diras, and if you do a good job, I'll take you for the other ones, probably. So the Kabbalan says, you know, I could be making a killing over here. It's a lot of work. So he gives a low price. And then I decide I want to take somebody else for the other deals. I have no complaint on this person's work. And he comes back to me and he says, you know, I gave you a discount because of this promise. You didn't fulfill the promise. So now I want the fair price. The halacha is he does not get the fair price because it was not contractual. This hurts, okay? It's important to know that. Now, when the person will come to me and say, Rabbi Zachariash, am I obligated? What am I supposed to tell him? Did you mislead the person? To a certain degree, yes. So does a person, so to speak, have a right to have a complaint? Could be he doesn't even have a right for tarus. And that depends exactly on the feeling of the situation. I can't even negotiate those waters. I'm not there. But there is a certain environment and a message that was given over Baal Peh, which the deal was done under that. As long as there was a escape hatch there, definitely you can't nab the guy. But there are situations, and this I said this many times, you know what? I understand what you're saying. How much is your word worth? The halacha is you're allowed to go back on your word. Is your word worth $10, $50, $100, $1,000? There's some people who say they're not a Mishan B'Dibura. Not because halacha demands it, but because I'm an Erlich person. So the concept of being Erlich and having a loophole don't exactly work together. Now, I'm just going to end off with the following thought, which is not a complete thought. Recently, on the radio, there is a advertisement about paying taxes. You should pay what you have to pay, velo shekel yoter. Okay? Ze nachon or ze lo nachon? If you pay taxes because you have to pay, not because you want to pay, so then that's a good philosophy. And those people pay taxes because they think that the government deserves. There's a man that I know, a Yida Tzaddik, was just nifter about 3 years ago at 95. And he said to a few people, which I was there, he said, and the government paid for him to be hospitalized in all of his medical treatment. My father had the means to pay for it, and therefore my father refused to take government funds to pay for something that he felt was his obligation. And when we walked away, people said, what's he talking about? So I said, he's talking about 100 years ago. It's very difficult nowadays to explain Erlich. Erlich. That means, and I'm just using this as an example, why should I put my garbage in the garbage can if the Iriyah pays workers to put it in there? I don't want them to be unemployed. I'm a Yida Tzaddik, right? They have a job. So do you. Benol Mechaveroi is not only about navigating the halacha. And I think that which Rabbi Kiva said, I think encompasses it all. As Chazal say, would you like somebody to do that to you? Then don't do it to him. Should be Zaycha, and there's a sphera that we not only the halacha, but also the spirit of the halacha as well.